Good morning. Welcome, and thank you for choosing my session. By the way, it's very appropriate that I'm going to talk about choice, and that you had a choice to choose the session. So hopefully, this meets your expectations here. Today, we're going to talk about choice in markets in public education. And to get started, I need to tell you a little bit about myself, a different introduction than you might expect, because usually when you go out and start to criticize choice, you're put into the anti-choice camp right away. You're against charter schools, you're against choice, you're for the status quo. I'm trying to make that not so easy for people so that they understand where I am with regard to choice, and that the discussion I'm going to have is really a critical discussion after looking at the research, after looking at what I understand is going on out there, and this isn't about me deciding that I'm anti-anything. So, what am I? I'm a public school choice parent. Should know that. I take advantage of choice. My daughters do not attend their local neighborhood school. They attend another traditional public school on the other side of town. So I am taking advantage of choice. Okay? So in this case, when I think about choice, I'm not against it, I actually use it. Number two, I'm a choice proponent. I think choice is healthy. I think choice is an important part of a vibrant public education system. I'm on the board of a charter school, right? So I think I am a proponent of choice. So where do I differ? I'm a strong critic of markets in education. And there's a difference, as we go through this, there's a difference between choice and markets, and I hope that we get to that and have a good discussion about why they're different and what it means for public policy in Arizona for us to understand the difference between choice and markets. Also, I hope we have a discussion. Last time, the group did great in terms of asking questions, so please, if you have a question, ask it. If you don't agree with something, let me know. It's part of this opportunity is for us to engage. We're a small enough group so that we can have a conversation instead of a lecture. All right, so where are we? School choice has been Arizona's dominant education policy for the last 20 years. School choice was expected to improve student achievement, and here's the key, in all schools. When I say all schools, I do not mean just the schools that parents have chosen to attend. That's not how choice was supposed to work in Arizona. Both the schools that parents chose and their students attended, and the schools they left were supposed to get better. Most of the time when people look at this question, they look at the choice schools. How are they? Are they doing any better? This conversation, we're going to open up our thinking and look at all schools, even the schools that students left. Did they get better? Because it's only when both sets, the exited school and the entered school, both improve, that choice has the ability to have the kind of broad impact that policymakers expected. We've done really well. One of the top, if not collectively the top state in the country on school choice. Our parents have more choice than any others in the country. In fact, if you read the paper last week, one of the things that's put forward, one of the real merits that's put forward about public education in Arizona is our parents have a lot of choice. Right? As I mentioned, the idea is that choice would not just improve the chosen schools, but the district schools as well. Now, I'm going to talk about charter schools as choice schools because by and large, that has been the frame that we have looked at choice in public education. Right? So this isn't about charter schools per se, but charter schools are a manifestation of choice. So when you look at it this way, when charter schools opened up, the thought was that both charter schools and district schools would get better. How? How many of you heard the rising tide lifts all boats? How many of you heard that phrase before? Yeah, that's what was supposed to happen. Open up good quality schools of choice and everybody gets better, the choice schools and the non-choice schools. It's also supposed to work through an economic principle that we have come to really take as almost a natural law in the United States, and that's this idea of the invisible hand in Adam Smith's approach, that you can improve individual people making individual choices according to their best interest, can make things better for everybody collectively in a market setting. Very much the underlying dynamic of choice in Arizona. Questions? So where are we? These are national reading scores, 4th grade. Since, this goes back to 92 if you can't read that well, which is about the year that we started choice in Arizona, Arizona has been stagnant. We haven't improved. On the bottom line, I'll get to that in a second, on the bottom line, but we haven't improved. We have not seen collectively the kind of large-scale gains that top policymakers expected or that we might see in the private sector when choice is unleashed. Right? When choice is made available, we've seen services go down to be cheaper. I could think of electronics, for instance. Better, cheaper, more advanced. We haven't seen any of that largely in Arizona according to the bottom line. We need to be clear, however, this is math. We've improved, but so has the rest of the country, so we haven't gained ground. And I want to be clear, this is the bottom line, folks. When we talk about student achievement, when I hear the word student achievement, I think test score, because that's exactly what it means, test score. Right? So when policymakers wanted Arizona to improve, when policymakers wanted Arizona to do better than other states, what they meant exactly was they wanted test scores to improve. Test scores are the currency in a policy environment. They are what counts. In fact, I would argue we don't know anything else in a policy environment except for test scores.
Great. The English language arts.
Really important, because that bottom line, I'm not going to let us get away and talk about anything else other than what I understand to be the bottom line, which is test scores. Let me get the most common question out of the way. Most folks, when they look at this question, ask, are charter schools better than traditional public schools? Or more particularly, do charter schools score higher on test scores than traditional public schools? Here's the answer. Marginally at best. Marginally at best. But overall, charter schools score a lot like traditional public schools, on average. The difference, this is why this is up here right here, is that the distribution of achievement in traditional public schools and district schools and charter schools is a little bit different. I'm giving Dr. Baca nightmares here, putting up a bell curve and talking about this from class. The distribution of schools, of district schools, it looks a lot like your traditional bell curve. You've got some low achieving schools, high achieving schools, lots in the middle. Charter schools are the opposite, actually. You've got a lot of underperforming or low performing charter schools and lots of really highly performing charter schools and fewer in the middle. And the public perception is mostly on these really high achieving charter schools, and there are a number of them. And we come away thinking charter schools do better than traditional public schools. But on average, there is no difference, a marginal difference. And to me, that explains why the introduction of charter schools in public education has not resulted in the kind of large-scale gains that policymakers expected. Because if 12% of students are in schools that are marginally better, that's not going to push the state. It's not enough for the state to have the kind of gains that policymakers intended. This presentation, however, from here forward, is not about the 12% who chose to go to have chosen to go to a charter school. It's about the 88% who are in a traditional public school, and whether or not their traditional public school is better because somebody has chosen to go someplace else. Because it has to work that way. Markets have to work that way. We got to be clear, that is exactly how markets have to work. Otherwise, they do not have the large scale impact that we'd expect them to. I don't want to pick on Arizona, by the way. You should know these are national and international results. Charters, choice environments, market kind of environments. In other states, you find the same thing. These are some adjectives: slight, modest, internationally fragmented. So this isn't because our charter schools aren't doing great. This idea that when given choice and you have choice schools, overall, that there is modest or fragmented or inconclusive results is not just Arizona, it's nationally and internationally as well. Questions? Disagreements? Yes?
On the NAEP scores that you showed,
Uh-huh.
overall, they had an improvement over time. However, Arizona stayed continuously below the national
That's right.
average. So I've always wondered, when I look at those, is that improvement statistically significant or not? Because, human beings do better on tests over time, no matter what. So
Sure.
is there been a study? I mean, to me, overall, the U.S. test scores have improved.
They have improved. They have improved. And there's a difference between statistically significant and meaningful. Right? We've gone up a few points, and it's statistically significant. That doesn't mean a lot. Right? This is where the stats teacher in me comes out here. It isn't necessarily meaningful. We have improved as a state. The question is, and this is thinking about closing the gap here, to improve, to catch up, we need to improve more than everybody else. Right? And in Arizona, the thought, say again? Are you talking internationally then? In general. Anytime you have a gap to close, you need to move double time. Right? Because if you move at the rate that everybody else is moving or slightly ahead, you're never going to catch up. Anytime you have a gap to close, you gotta move faster, exponentially. Don't know exactly, depends on the gap, but you got to move faster. Right? And the thought in Arizona was that having choice available would allow us to close some of those gaps, would allow us to move ahead in test scores compared to other states, let's say, that have not pursued choice as a dominant educational policy.
So do you think if we hadn't pursued choice that our scores would be even significantly lower?
No, I don't. Okay. I do think we'd have more money in public education, though.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you my reason why. Yes, sir.
So when you talked about choice over here on the reverse bell curve,
Okay.
there's a piece of that where people are making the choice for their students to come back,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because of extracurriculars, because of disciplinary referrals, because of special ed
Keep going.
purposes, where they send the kids back. I mean, because we can't provide the services you need.
Any more reasons why people
but I
choose?
feel like I'm complaining.
So, any more reason why people choose? Keep going.
Yeah, there are a lot.
What's the one he's missing? The one that matters, currency. Test scores. You're moving ahead to the crux of this thing, which is if parents don't choose on test scores are not going to improve in a market setting. They have to choose on test scores, or else that currency is not going to go up. It's almost as if people are making choices to go to businesses but not worrying about money. Folks, when policymakers look at choice, they pay attention to one thing, test scores. And if parents are making choices on anything else, that creates a huge disconnect between how things are supposed to work in policy logic and how they work in household logic. But you're a couple steps ahead. I still got to make my case. Right? All right, if you walk away and understand one thing from here, it's this: choice are not markets. Arizona has pursued choice, but really, if you listen to policymakers, what they want is markets. They wanted to unleash market pressure, market forces, market competition, so that traditional public schools and charter schools alike would improve. That's what they wanted. And you can still see it today. When you see choice, read down a little bit and you're going to see words like pressure, competition. Right? Because it isn't choice that Arizona really wanted when they started this and that they needed to improve public education for everybody. What they needed and wanted were markets and market competition. What's the difference between choice and markets? Here's the difference. Choice benefits choosers. I'm better off because I've chosen to go to a different school for my daughters. I'm better off. But I do not believe that my choice to go to that school makes my local neighborhood school any better. I'm the only one that benefits. In order for the invisible hand to work, both parties have to benefit. Me because I chose, and the traditional public school because I chose. Because they need to look at me and go, okay, what do we got to do to get him back? We got to get better to bring him back. Yes, ma'am.
Did you tell them why you chose?
I did.
Okay.
They'll never bring me back. They'll never bring me back. Why? Because as Dr. Baca knows very fondly, I chose because because I value a Montessori education.
Okay.
Period. Not a test score. They could bring me the highest test scores in the state, And I'd go, that's wonderful, I'm really happy. But unless you teach Montessori, I'm not coming back.
But most parents that choose don't go back and tell them why they chose.
They don't, and neither do most consumers, but it would be nice if they did. Right? This is so interesting to me, that this idea that everybody has to benefit. Anybody familiar with the education savings accounts, these empowerment accounts? Do you know that when somebody chooses to go away from the public school system, 10% of the money is left behind? Why didn't they take all 100? Why did they kindly leave 10% behind? Read it, and it's so that they can write this sentence in everything that's related to this, right? Because when I leave and I take 90, I'm leaving you 10 and you're better off. That's exactly the read it. Pull it up right now. Something on education empowerment accounts. You will not get one page through it, and you will read that not only the people who choose, but the people who didn't choose benefit because people chose. Because if they take all 100%, it becomes very clear. The only winner is the chooser. The chooser. Pull it up. Pull up the Friedman Institute right now. I'll give you one page in, and they're going to make that argument that things are better for everybody because I only took 90%, and you're not giving me any services, and I'm leaving you 10% behind to make things better for you. So why not? This is the crux of this presentation. Why don't markets work in public education? All right, let's talk about how markets are supposed to work. My coffee shop example. Ready? Here's how markets are supposed to work. I go to coffee shop A, I get a bad cup of coffee. As a rational consumer, I got to be a rational consumer, I do two things. I have to leave coffee shop A. Got to get out of here. Got to go someplace else. And if I'm really nice, I tell you why I left. Okay? I then go to coffee shop B and buy coffee from them. Here's the key. Because they serve a better cup of coffee. Not because the barista's nicer. Not because it's a more comfortable place to sit. If coffee's going to get better, I got to go to coffee shop B because they serve coffee. And in that relationship, interestingly, remarkably, according to the invisible hand, coffee shop A gets better or closes, and coffee shop B gets a lot of business. And you, David, lives in Chandler. I live in Central Phoenix. I'm a rational consumer. When he comes to Central Phoenix, he gets a better cup of coffee because I acted rationally. Why? Because coffee shop A has either closed down or gotten better, or the only booming coffee shop in Central Phoenix is coffee shop B. The person who didn't choose, got left behind, had no relation, no interaction, actually gets a better service. That's how it's supposed to work in education too, right? How many times have you heard your policymakers say, we're going to open up a great school, and the school that got those people who got left behind, that school's either going to get better or close down? Say again?
I said a lot of that has happened.
So why not? All right, so what do individual schools need to improve? And we'll put this now in an education setting. What are individual schools? Well, schools need to understand why parents left, and they need to be able to do something about it. My traditional public school, my local neighborhood school, unless they become a Montessori school, can do nothing to bring me back. Now, Dr. Baca could open up a Montessori high school. Well, then, wait a minute, hang on. Now, my local high school, if they want to bring me back, short of opening up a Montessori high school, they can bring me great test scores. It's not my bottom line. It's not my currency. What the state needs for this to work is a whole bunch of rational consumers making decision on the bottom line, which is test scores. My private school example. Number one reason why people pick private schools. Anybody know? Friends. Status. Not according to parents. They don't admit that. Religion. Yes. Most private schools are religious, and most people say that they choose religious schools because they teach religion. Now, Dr. Baca can open up a Montessori school to attract me, but if he wanted to attract back people that went to a Catholic school, what can you do, Ken? Nothing. Short of teaching religion or becoming religious. Nothing that Ken can do to get better. Why doesn't this work? Well, I decided to look at the consumers. Come to two conclusions about parents. One, they don't act rationally, and two, they view their schools as communities and not as businesses. That's why this doesn't work. Let's start with the rational part. As I mentioned, parents do not choose on that bottom line. If you ask parents why they choose schools, there's almost like a hierarchy of needs. You can have a very highly academic school, but if it is not safe, and my student doesn't feel secure there, high and welcome there, the academics of that school are irrelevant for my student. Right? And I would argue as parents, that's pretty rational. Why do parents stay in a failing school, meaning F school according to the state's test scores? Because that school, for their student, is both safe and secure, physically, mentally, emotionally. Another major reason why parents choose schools is who else is in the school. We never talk about it, never brought up. But truth is, when parents pick schools, they pick schools because of, well, the other parents who are at the school. Nothing to do with test scores, by the way. Right? Great study out of Washington, D.C. They opened up a new website and gave it to parents and said, hey, this is open for choice. And then they paid attention to how parents came in and clicked, where they went to and how long they stayed on information. The first place parents went to was the demographics of the school. Second place, the zip code of the school, which, by the way, is a proxy for the demographics of the school. Then it was academic programs. Then it was teacher characteristics. You know where test scores were on that clicking behavior? Way down there. 5th, 6th, don't remember exactly. Not one of the top. Right? Now, usually when you bring this up, especially, as I mentioned, I went to the University of Chicago, where you bump into economists all the time, and their response was the markets aren't efficient. Parents don't know. Parents need better information. If you give them better information, then they will make better choices. Remember, better information is test scores. We can slice, dice, cut up, present test scores in any way you wanted to as the state level. The question is, will parents then rely on that to make school choice decisions? I'd argue no. School folks in the room, parents, the number one source of information most trusted is other parents. Formal sources of information, well down on the list. And it's not a circumstance where a parent walks up to me and says, that's a great school, that I then look at the report card and go, you know what? That doesn't look so good anymore. I will probably go back to another parent and ask. Those who have chosen schools, it may sound familiar. So parents don't act rationally. They do some interesting things. You know, under No Child Left Behind, we went to parents and we said, failing school, you can get up and leave. Right? All failing schools and No Child Left Behind had to hold a meeting. Principal got up and said, community, we're a failing school. You can get up and go. The district's going to pay for transportation. And most of them stayed. Irrational? In fact, one of my other students, who was a principal at the time, I said, well, what happened? And she said, they turned to me and said, well, what do we do to make the school better? So here's how coffee shops really work in education. Ready? Coffee shop A gives me a bad cup of coffee, and then I do something remarkable, unheard of, never seen in a private market interaction. I get behind the counter, and I help the barista make me a better cup of coffee. In education, that's called parent involvement. And in market settings, it's totally, completely, 100% irrational. It distorts everything for everybody. And it guts the discipline of the market. It's also how parents act. So why? I'll just get you through this really quickly because I have no choice with the way this is set up. But this is basically looking at the percentage of students who are exit in and exit out. One of the things I think is interesting is that more parents choose to go into failing charter schools than any other school in the state. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question though. When you use the coffee shop rationale, isn't it partial though that the person that goes and spends the money in that coffee shop actually can see their money out of their hands get that bad product where realistically in the school districts, it's all part of your property tax. You don't see that money. Isn't that part of the economic driver as well? When you actually spend it?
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting because Cato and Alec will actually take that a step further. And they say if you pay for it yourself, you're going to value it more. Right? I had a conversation about the empowerment scholarships with somebody, and I said, do you think they're going to keep up with inflation? They said, no, probably not. But if parents have to pay for the difference, they're going to value that service more. The quote was, they're going to have skin in the game. Right? My response was, how much more skin do you need than turning over your child to a school to be educated? Even though it isn't money that is being transacted, I drop my daughters off every day at that gate. And I would argue that transaction, and when they come out of that gate, by the way, and I asked them, what did you do today? And their response and how they respond about their day, I would argue is just as effective as handing $3 to somebody to give me a cup of coffee. I see those transactions as the same. Well, let's see how invested parents make it better for all parents. Number 2, parents view schools as communities, not as businesses. The rational behavior in school, getting up and going someplace else, is costly. In economic terms, there are high transaction costs associated with switching schools. New friends, you've got to catch up on, you have to change logistics, by the way. I mean, just even figuring out the new driving patterns and time to leave the house and pick it up is enough. Pick your students up is enough, right? But more particularly, if you look at how parents behave, they don't behave like consumers when they get into schools. They behave like members of communities. If you look at how members of communities behave, it looks a lot like parents. Because once parents choose schools, their first inclination is not to get up and go someplace else. Their first inclination is for that school to work. And they look a lot like members of, here's how members of communities act, okay? That's actually a law that the idea is that in a community, your most committed people are the last to leave. Completely irrational. If you think about it, if you're really invested in an organization, you stick around in that declining organization a lot longer than somebody who has a marginal interest in that. And the more you're invested, the more you stay. Completely irrational. Because you believe that if I leave, then it's going to go under, and I love this. And so I stay. Parents also do something else. This might get to your point, sir, a little bit. I know that as soon as I chose that school is better because I'm there. Schools, again, not as businesses. Look, I am consuming this tie. I'm not making this tie any better. I'm consuming it. And when I'm done with it, I will get rid of it. When I go into a school, I am not just taking quality out of that school. I am making that school better because I am there. Because I get involved. Because I look out for the school in general. And the parent that might not have the time and energy, that simply drops their student off, they benefit because I stick around and get involved. They don't have to get involved themselves. They don't have to get involved. But they can benefit from me getting involved and making the school better for everybody else. We are now talking about, we have a lexicon, examples here that look nothing like market relationships. In a market relationship, I look out for me, you look out for you, and collectively things get better for all of us. Right? That's if I was if I was a consumer and schools were businesses. So the common retorts. When you say things like this, what are you going to expect? When you leave here and say, choice is not the same as markets, you're going to hear 3 things, and I'm going to give you the answer to them right now. Number 1, we need better markets. More efficient information. Part of my argument is, how much more do we need to increase choice or markets in Arizona to get the kind of test score increases that we're looking for? I see a huge discrepancy. We're the top in one, almost at the bottom on the other. you hear, well, you know, we need to get the test scores out there. If parents saw them, understood them, then they would make those choices. Think about yourself as parents. Would you? Or would you continue to pay attention to safety, security, academic specialization? Retort number 2. Districts are not responding well. They're not responding appropriately. They're responding the way we expect businesses to, protecting the status quo. Well, then all right, let's look at that one. I would argue that district responses are actually very logical given the main reason why parents choose. The major reason why parents choose charter schools in this case over traditional public schools are 2. They're smaller and more specialized. There are great surveys of charter school parents asking, why are you at this school? Number 1, because they're smaller. Because I'm choosing to go to a 400-student high school instead of a 2,500-student high school. And second, because they're specialized. They have arts or science or some specialization, Montessori, that I value and want my kids to be exposed to. So, in response to this, guess what district schools have done? When given the opportunity to open up a brand new school, do they open up a large comprehensive high school with no specific specialization? No. I just said, Dr. Bach is opening up how many students going to be at the school?
Just to preface it for the sake of my...
But it's K-12, right? Ah, man, I'm ready to move. I'm ready to move. I'm already jumping to open. Okay, how many students in the school under consideration?
About 400 to 500.
400 to 500. If that school under consideration were 2,500, even though it probably wouldn't attract just because of the size. And it's not just a 4 to 500 student school in general, it's a 4 to 500 specific school. Phoenix Union Scott High School District, a number of years ago, they passed an initiative, largely in response to charter schools. They called it the Small Schools Initiative. And what did they open up? Bioscience school, fire science school, specialized schools. Right? And a very logical response, I would argue. So maybe administrators are acting like business folks. Number 3, schools should act more like businesses. Yes. On a few things. And here's my test. If you can stack it, treat it like a business. You can stack chairs, you can stack bricks, you can stack books. We should be as efficient and as business-oriented as possible on all of those things. But nobody, and you can look in the literature, if you find it, bring it to me. Nobody has articulated how markets should work in a classroom. I have never seen it. Nobody has written something to teachers to express to them how they should cut their losses. Right? When we talk about markets in education, it ends at about the principal level. Nobody has put forward, that I have seen, the market response to teachers to act more like businesses. I've never seen it. If you do, please send it to me because I'm interested. And why not? I'm going to read this. I read this quote a little while ago and I stuck with it, and it's always stuck with me, and here it is. Markets work precisely because they are neither gentle nor forgiving. They are impersonal mechanisms that gain their power by harnessing self-interest and drawing on desire and fear. That, folks, is the discipline of the market. The question is, do we want schools, do you want to put your child in a school that works on this premise? What makes markets so amazingly efficient in the United States is I can lose my job tomorrow if I don't keep up. Is this the framework that you want schools to work with every day? Because that is exactly how markets work, if they're going to work. Questions? Yes?
You talked about test scores as the currency, the most important currency.
In policy, yes.
And certainly I've heard one of the retorts is, well, by providing choice, we're actually increasing the basket of goods considered in currency. So, if we want to improve education, we don't want just to improve test scores. We want to improve more Montessori schools, or whatever it is that a parent thinks makes for a better education. Therefore, with choice, we have parents making the whole basket of goods that comes from the school. That whole thing should improve. Whatever it is, that whatever their choices are, that's what the currency ought to be. Now, the problem with that, from my perspective, as a taxpayer especially, who no longer has children in school, is what the chooser wants in that basket of goods might be different from what the taxpayer wants in terms of long-term benefits to society. So what kind of comments do you have about those two ideas? That first of all, do we only care about test scores? And secondly, what about what a parent wants versus what long-term benefits to society?
What you're getting to is what I think is a real underlying dynamic in Arizona. And that is the difference between the individual and the collective. Individuals and collectives, okay? In a market-oriented free system in Arizona, you got no say. It's between me, you do. You're not. Are you a consumer? Do you have a child you're going to put in a school? No, I do. I got a child. You're not even in the market. You got nothing. There is no collective, folks, in a market setting. There is no we. You're out of this entirely.
Except for tax dollars.
Well,
And people we elect. And policy.
but still, I make my choices, right? I make my choices. Yes, you might have a governance approach. Yes, you might have, but in reality here, what you want me to do, it really does come back to me making my individual choices. Now, the challenge is, it makes it really hard to create collective action in a place where you've encouraged people to take individual initiative. And I would argue that's one reason why Arizona has been a bit challenged, the money question. I think some of this is the reason why we haven't had the kind of collective response in Arizona from a financial perspective that one might see when they see is because I can take my toys and pick my school and never have to engage in the collective to make things better for me. Right? When people see schools of choice, especially schools of choice, they think they see competition in action. What they see is the opportunity for like-minded people, teachers, administrators, students, teachers, to come together with a similar academic mission and learn together, be together. Right? That's really powerful. But the school I left isn't any better as a result of that, even though it may be better for me. So it is a challenge in Arizona because we like to talk about our parents as consumers. Right? And the more we talk about them as consumers, it sets up this individual approach versus collectively. What is my collective responsibility to coffee shop A? Right? And it's a tremendous challenge. Yes?
You know, I just want to make one point, though. Okay, so let's say that you took a kid that was failing at the school and took him to a Montessori school, who now that was his learning style and succeeded.
Okay.
So you did improve both schools, and you did improve for the taxpayer who has nobody in the market.
How's the school I left better? Other than the fact that I increased their mean by taking my kid out.
You have the kid in the regular school who's failing. So his test scores are lowering all of them. He goes to Montessori, now he's successful, and his test scores are higher.
That's actually great. The chooser benefited. I totally agree with you. That school is no better. Other than by subtraction, right? Other than by me taking my child out. I benefit. Right?
Scores because you have that kid that was failing isn't there any longer.
Sure. And in that case, I would argue that school, even though again by taking them out and they're failing and they go to a Montessori school and get better, the next student coming in, I'm another failing student now. Okay? I walk into this school that I just left. How are things better for me now?
Okay, so they said, all right, we got to do some Montessori.
Oh, well, wait a minute. No. So there's the catch right there. Right? There's the catch right there. There's the catch right there. Absolutely, but it's not on test scores. That's the key, folks. This is not on test scores, right? If at the end of this we're having conversations about teachers, good choices made available to parents, and remembering that we have a collective responsibility and that unleashing the market is not going to improve public education by itself, I've done a service today. Because for that kid who's a failing school that goes to the school, that school does not serve me a better cup of coffee because I left, even though I've increased the mean of the school, per se. Yes, ma'am?
I was just going to say that those of us in public education, though, however, have a responsibility where you left your school and went to a Montessori school. We have a responsibility to listen to why you left the school. We can't make this a Montessori, but what if it was for safety concerns or what could be a million different reasons why they left that school. And so I believe that districts, administrations, and school boards need to be held more accountable to their constituents, to their families, to do like Tempe Union's done, maybe schools within schools, where we, you know, and again, we all know that it's changing the dynamics, but I think that to help with this argument that's out there, the public schools have to do a better job creating the markets or the choice, let's say the choices, for those families by creating, whether it be fine arts or, you know, whatever that choice is, STEM, whatever it might be. But I think that what's happening is you're saying the rational, you know, people aren't making those decisions. People want to stay in their community school, and there's nothing greater than a coalition of parents that are committed to change that. So I do agree that the only way you're going to get those changes is with those passionate parents, and there may only be a very small percentage to save that community school. So I think that again, those of us in the public education, those administrations, those public officials have, I think, a bigger duty to protect and to represent those students.
We're exactly on the same page. Because I haven't heard business, I haven't heard market, I haven't heard test scores, I haven't heard shut down, I haven't heard anything that if I were to go to West Washington, I'd hear in response to this, right? You're talking about building communities.
But we have to do a better job in public education listening to our families, constituents, and I don't think we do as good of a job as we could.
I agree. And with our last couple minutes here, if we leave here and change the perception, the approach to public policy about building schools, building communities, and creating, this is exactly what you're talking about here, right? Read this slide. If we switch to this as our way of operating in public education, I think we have an opportunity to make education better, but not necessarily test scores, not this market approach. But now we're treating parents as members of communities, we're treating schools as communities, and we're paying attention to the importance of community. That idea, that approach, even those words, by the way, have not been the dominant lexicon in public policy in Arizona for the last 20 years. It has been, if you don't like it, get up and go. Get up and go. Instead of, I have made a choice, and I want the resources necessary to make that choice the best it can be for myself, my child, and my community, and others who also may have made that choice, but may not have the time and energy to do it. We're out of time.
No, we actually have about 5 more minutes.
Oh, we got about 5 more minutes.
But are you able to answer this question? What are parents choosing?
What or how?
No, what? Are they choosing to leave public education? Do you
Oh.
have any information in regard to that?
Okay, so when they choose, like I said, parents are choosing small specialized schools. Small, and that is in traditional public schools and charter schools alike. Right? Small specialized schools. What does this mean? Let's think about this for a second. Why does a neighborhood school open up? Why? Because people build houses there. That's it. People build houses. And we need enough space for the people to go through. Now, and when that neighborhood school opens up and says, we're the neighborhood school, we're here because, well, the developer is required to plat out a plot of land and we're here. Okay, great. If I were to open up a school of choice next door, you know what I would make it? Not a normal neighborhood school. I would pick an academic specialization. Because charter schools open up because of a sense of purpose, not because of space. And they come forward and say, we're an art school. I have studied the responses of charter schools in a market environment, and I found out that those who have been most stable over time had a strong academic mission. And those who had kind of a broader, we're here for college prep in general, right, had to change their mission to get more specialized. So, if I were thinking about this from a district perspective and public policy perspective, one, I'd make it easier for traditional public schools to open up 400 to 500 student high schools, number one. You may not know this, but The state will not start funding a high school until you reach 2,400, 2,000. Is that right? I mean, you need to demonstrate that you got over 2,000 before the state will say, okay, school facilities board, we need to build a high school now. Right? Now, even in the design of those schools, got some graduate students in architecture who are taking on this problem for me right now. They worked a little bit with Dr. Baca, which is, how do you now take the plot of a traditional big comprehensive high school and turn it into 4 distinct campuses? Not necessarily schools within schools. I think schools within schools are a good effort, but structurally they break down. So take the same plot that you'd put a big square box comprehensive high school, and these students are putting 4 individual high schools, smaller high schools in the corners, right, basically. And so I can go to an art school, I can go to a specialized school, a STEM school, whatever it is, and in the middle are sports facilities, comprehensive sports facilities, arts, etc., and we can all join the same team and play sports and do activities. But I go to a school that becomes more specialized. That's what they're choosing on. Now that's after safety, by the way, which is key. But for policymakers, the thing to remember is they're not choosing because that school has the highest test scores, period. That's really important.
I talked recently with a lady who had just moved here, and I just want to share this comment with you because I thought it was interesting. She said that she had 2 kids in college and a 2nd grader, and she put more time and effort into choosing a school for her 2nd grader than she ever did for her 2 kids in college in this state, because she got here and there was all this choice and she didn't know what to do. And I think parents are having a very difficult time with that, trying to figure out the best place to put their children.
Well, obviously.
And we need to get away from, by the way, best place for the children. That's really key, folks. You know, when you talk about best, people talk about what are the best schools. I don't think there's a best school. I think all of this idea of going out and finding out what the best school is and trying to replicate their practices, let me tell you what you're going to find. I will tell you right now what you're going to find. Good people and a sense of purpose. That's what you're going to find. Right? I don't think there's a best school in the state. However, I do think there's the best school for my child. And I think there's the best school for your child and your child. They may not be the same absolute best in this case. Right? When I was associate superintendent for the state of Arizona, every once in a while I get a call from somebody out of state and said, I want to know the best school. Can you tell me the best school? And I said, well, tell me about your kid. I mean, how am I supposed to help you with that? I can tell you which one has the highest test scores, but it doesn't mean that it's the best school. Right? At least for your student.
So then don't you need choice?
I think you absolutely need choice. I said that up front. I think we need choice. But we also need to stop focusing on just choice as the rising tide that lifts all boats in Arizona. We need to rethink about what choice means, its place in Arizona, and get back to this collective notion that we really are all in this together, and from a public perspective, instead of relying on the backs and the shoulders of parent consumers to improve everything for everybody else. There's where this idea breaks down.
This is kind of off topic, but the underlying thing that keeps bothering me is back to the currency, right? So when we're comparing ourselves internationally to other countries, that's what international means. So we're not even comparing on the same guidelines because they don't necessarily educate all kids, and I'm not using that as an excuse, but our currency is kind of devalued from the start because we educate all kids. We as parents feel an entitlement. We have this, everybody has this, but we're not on the same scale.
Sure.
So that's kind of just throwing me.
And we're not on the same scale. Guys, the most people putting us on the same scale are policymakers. That's who I hear the scale from. I hear that more often than not. Right, is that we got to put us on the same scale. I spent 8 days in Finland. Okay, Finland is one of the top scoring. When you ask Finland what they did not set out to have the highest test scores in the world. You know what they set out to do? To have the most equitable schools in the world. That was their goal. And in achieving that goal, it turned out they ended up with the highest assessment scores in the world. Then you turn and ask Finland, well, how is this generated into economic development? And they'll tell you, not a lot, right? Not a lot. I was in Spain at the same time I was doing this trip when Steve Jobs died. Interesting discussions in the Spanish editorials, and the question was, where's the next Steve Jobs going to come from? Where? India, China, where? Begrudgingly, because all of Europe has a love-hate relationship with us, begrudgingly they decided the United States for two reasons. One, because your ideas are protected here. In China or India, you come up with an idea, your neighbor steals it, and there's no recourse. So there's a good legal reason. But second, because this country has a sense of innovation about it and a spirit about it that you simply can't replicate or even put on the same scale. They wish they could have some of that, but it's not something you can dictate from public policy, right? It's something that becomes part of it, and they don't get it. The idea of somebody starting a business in their garage for no reason, and it just does not translate there. And so we're talking about something that I would argue isn't necessarily the same scale when you want to look at international competition. So, thank you very much. It's our time. I will be here.